Hello Chipmunk and Chipette fans, and welcome back to another Alvin and the Chipmunks elaboration video. My name is Grandy Tamias, and today's topic is gonna be a little controversial if you couldn't put two and two together from the title, the toxicity of the Alvin and the Chipmunks fanbase. Before I begin, I want to say that I was going to have a bunch of images to show throughout the duration of this video, but there's something I'm trying to be cautious about that I'll explain near the end. And I just want to make it clear that this is not a rant video. I'm not going to ramble about what's so flawed and that it needs changing because there's only one way to do it. There isn't just one way or one flaw. This is a collective effort that all of us fans need to undertake if we want the Alvin and the Chipmunks fanbase, or any fanbase really, to be the best that it can be. First, we need to address what a toxic fanbase is. You may have heard this term tossed around in relation to fanbases like Sonic the Hedgehog or Steven Universe. Basically, a toxic fanbase is one with a large amount of members who bully others over their opinions and constantly impose their own ideology on how they think the pop culture property that they are a fan of should be, and complain when it's not. Like with the examples I mentioned, the Sonic fanbase argues their opinions of how the gameplay should work and criticize Sega for making bad Sonic games. Steven Universe, well, that gets into some pretty touchy subjects, but it's also mostly opinions that lead to people being bullied just for expressing what genuinely makes them happy about Steven Universe. Now, disregarding all the fan artwork, fan fiction, shippings, and all that unofficial jazz that I usually tend not to get into, there are three things that I think are making the Alvin and the Chipmunks fanbase toxic. The generational divide, the weaponization of misinformation and opinions, and, I hate to say this, but something to do with Bagdasarian Productions themselves, but I'll get back to that. Hint, hint, the reason why this video only has one image. First, the generational divide. This is mainly in regards to the expansion of the fanbase after the beginning of the live-action movies. Prior to that, it was mostly made up of older fans who grew up on the second-generation series from the 80s and 90s, and while the internet was certainly mainstream well before the first live-action film came out, the few and mostly far-between nature of new Alvin and the Chipmunks content from the preceding decade didn't make the fanbase that engaging and active. So when the 2007 film came out, some late teen and young adult folks certainly came in because of nostalgia for the older cartoons, but the vast majority were younger fans who weren't familiar with Ross Bagdasarian Sr. or the Chipmunk Adventure or all that. And this has had repercussions for years after, and still now. As fans who were introduced to the franchise via the films were getting older and using the internet more, the fanbase has become mostly comprised of these people. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of folks I know, including former members of Monk Media, who became fans because of the movies and are generally nice people. I myself can also be considered one of those kinds of fans because I'm now in my early 20s. I watched the heck out of the first three live-action films when I was younger, but I was also aware of the original version of the Chipmunk song, and I have parents who grew up on the cartoon from the 80s. Although I didn't know much about the lore of the cartoons or the real-life stories about how the franchise came to be, I had respect for the fact that there was a history to the Chipmunks before the movies. And, more importantly, I didn't let my enjoyment of the movies dictate whether or not I felt that the older media was important or inferior to what I grew up with. Instead, when I finally was curious enough to look into it, I judged it on its own merits. While I did like the franchise's older media more, as well as the 2015 series that came out around the same time, I gave the movies a fair chance and still hold a decent amount of respect for them today. And I'm sure there are some of you just like me in that regard. The fact that the movies were not so critically well received and full of potty humor has given fans of my generation a bad rep, and by extension the fan base that we identify with. If you found that potty humor stuff funny from the movies as a kid and still do now, that's fine. You think it's superior to the older Chipmunk media? Also fine, but be careful with that opinion. You think that the older media is inferior just because it isn't the movies and you want to promote your generation of Chipmunks over it? Not fine. Bottom line, you don't have to like that the movies are based on older cartoons and history. Just don't say that the movies are automatically better because you don't care for those cartoons or the history. And if you're entering a fan base that studies this franchise as a whole, you need to acknowledge that the movies are not the only things related to Alvin and the Chipmunks that exist. In other words, Ross Bagdasarian Sr. and everything before the movies may not be important to some people, but it is very important to the rest of us! Yep, that was a reference to the Polar Express. And since we're living in an age where the internet is more mainstream than ever, it's easy for fans who are otherwise divided by generations to learn about the Alvin and the Chipmunks franchise as a whole and judge for themselves. And please, apply this mindset to any fan base for an intellectual property spanning over decades, because I still run into people who think Michael Bay invented the concept of robots that turn into vehicles. He didn't. It's based on a cartoon from the 80s, which itself was based on a Japanese toy line. But that's beside the point. Actually, let me apply that to our Alvin and the Chipmunks situation. I still run into people who think 20th Century Fox invented the concept of chipmunks that sing. They didn't. It's based on cartoons from the 60s and 80s, which themselves were based on a novelty Christmas song. Wow, our favorite media is spawned from some really out-of-left-field things. Reason number 2, misinformation and opinions. The opinions part in a lot of ways connects back to what I said earlier about fans who are so obsessed with the movies that they have no regard for anything that came before, but this applies to even the most knowledgeable of Chipmunk fans. Besides the fact that there is more to life than Alvin and the Chipmunks, I mean, we should never invest too much of our pride in pop culture to the point that we don't care about real-world matters, people need to accept that the same thing can be liked for different reasons. For example, I said in my Sucktoad biology video that I liked the episode because it involved actual science, but a large portion of the fans liked it because of Alvin and Brittany's dynamic. And I know I said I wasn't going to be talking about shipping, but objectively speaking, viewing the episode in its original intended context, I can see why the Alvitney shippers would go crazy, but yeah, if I'm going to be honest, that group of fans blew it way out of proportion. With the fact that shipping in this fan base, even just among Alvitney shippers, already leads to heated debates, I'm bound to have already gotten comments attacking me about it because I opened my big mouth. While I personally have never encountered any toxicity while discussing the episode before, I can see how this episode simultaneously became both highly regarded and highly divisive. And that's without factoring in the science aspect, which I'm probably alone in because I had never seen anyone else talk about it before I made that video. I'm not saying I didn't like Alvin and Brittany's dynamic in that episode. I did. But in any fan base, it's possible for multiple people to like something for different or even opposite reasons. In this example, the science of the Sucktoad doesn't conflict with anything Alvitney related, but the problem to some may be that I just liked something not Alvitney related more. And it's not like that's a requirement for liking the episode, as I actually have a basis to justify why I like the Sucktoad creature. That being, I regularly do volunteer work at a zoo where I got to learn and eventually teach zoo guests about amphibian conservation and why they're important to us. The fact that the episode incorporated that message in some way, albeit subtly, gave me something to identify with personally. How many Alvin and the Chipmunks fans do you know who have experience with amphibian conservation? Probably few to none. And like with the generational divide, you don't have to care about why I like the episode, even though you probably should because one day you could end up depending on medicine from frogs, but you at least have to accept that there can be more than one reason for liking something. In fact, I would argue that some things can be great because there are multiple ways to like them. Thus, it attracts a wide variety of viewers. Moving on to the misinformation part, the example I'm going to use here is the debate of the Chipmunks' ages and age order. I was going to dedicate an entire video to bury this axe with this debate, but that probably wouldn't work and it may just end up making things worse. I mean, some of my most viewed videos are about those kinds of topics, and I still get comments asking me questions that can easily be answered by watching those videos. Anyway, much like the shippings, this one causes a lot of debate because so many fans argue about how old or who the oldest chipmunk they think is. Same goes for the chipettes, which I have yet to explain their ages, so that will be a video I'll have to make eventually. Again, watch the videos I already made if you want the facts, which is what a lot of people seem to not be knowing or are misinterpreting, hence this stuff being weaponized and causing so much toxicity. In fact, I'm starting to think that some people actively avoid the official answers that do exist because it doesn't fit with their ideals. If you want to headcanon how old you think the chipmunks are or who's the oldest one of them, that's fine. Just don't attack other people's opinions for why they think their own idea works for them. Same thing I've been saying before. But if you take this question seriously enough, which I do, that you want proof, there are official answers that you can find if you know where to look. And it changes depending on continuity, meaning the particular universe, the cartoon or movie series you're talking about is set in. So you have to specify that before you say who's older and what age. Take this statement, for example. In the 80s cartoon, the Chipmunks are somewhere between 8 and 9 years old. I'm not going to go over the evidence why, but trust me, this statement is true and correctly phrased. Key word being phrased. Just remember, in blank, the Alvin and the Chipmunks continuity that you're referring to, the Chipmunks are blank years old. And then you have to follow up that statement with evidence to justify it. Another example, in blank, blank is the oldest chipmunk because blank. In the 2015 series, Simon is the oldest chipmunk because his bio says he is 8 seconds older than Alvin. And Dave confirms this in the episode Big Brother Theodore, which is only the title of the episode, so don't be confused. Again, watch one of my previous videos. See, that wasn't so hard. Finally, reason number 3, Bagdasarian Productions has made some legal and business decisions that ultimately have had ripple effects for us fans. Though to be fair, they don't really have much of a choice in the matter, so don't automatically blame them. I can understand, being that they are a limited liability corporation, that Ross Bagdasarian Jr. and Janice Carmen want to protect the Alvin and the Chipmunks intellectual property, because that's how they're able to make deals with companies like Technicolor and PGS to make the 2015 series and distribute it. Heck, we probably wouldn't be getting seasons 6 and 7 if they weren't as protective. But they may have gone too far with what counts as a breach of copyright, and this leads to why I made this Elaboration podcast style. Their legal team have gone as far as to strike reviews here on YouTube of the episodes, even if they don't have moving footage and would normally count as critique under fair use. And this happened to me last year when I made a review of the 2015 series Christmas special. Monk Media's Monkcasts and World Tour series were also taken down, and a friend of mine who made videos with Chipmunk plush toys several years ago also got her videos taken down. In both instances, from what I've been told, those videos were removed because they were imitating the characters, which normally would be considered parody, also under fair use. Basically, it's like the differing approaches of Sega and Nintendo for content related to their games on YouTube. Sega is more lenient and appreciates that gamers want to share so much about how they play Sonic games, whereas Nintendo has been known to copyright strike entire channels for doing playthroughs of their games. Bagdasarian, well, falls closer to the Nintendo end of that spectrum. I cannot for the life of me understand why Bagdasarian's legal team thinks reviews or imitating the characters automatically means fans are violating copyright. Just look at any other franchise. You'll find countless channels that review and or imitate characters. So, does this mean if How It Should Have Ended decided to make a video about how one of the live-action Chipmunk films should have ended, they would be violating copyright when they've already been doing the exact same thing for so many other film franchises over a decade now here on YouTube? By the way, I would love to see how they would make Road Chip end. The Bagdasarians themselves, from what I've heard, do appreciate the fans and like that the franchise has as big of a fan base as it does, but it's clear they've been having trouble with their business model, at least as far as their legal team is concerned, in order to have a good relationship with their customers. Us, essentially. They don't get a lot of time to interact with fans much or view fan content because of how much work they put into the show, but they don't need to do that to show that they care about their fans. They just need to allow fans to not feel like they're being too restricted with what they can or cannot say, or how they want to show their appreciation for the Alvin and the Chipmunks franchise. And you know what they say, imitation is the highest form of flattering. Because I support the officially released content, but even when it's just one still image or a parody like the Monkcast, I don't see how Bagdasarian or PGS or whoever thinks that's going to substantially cut into their revenue. If anything, we're essentially advertising Alvin and the Chipmunks for free. There may have been fans who wanted to get into the 2015 series and did so because of the Monkcast. With music, on the other hand, I can sort of understand why they copyright that as strictly as they do. There used to be a time when Wikipedia was able to link videos to their own channel of the songs for their articles, but now, sure, you can still find a good amount of official songs here on YouTube, but a lot of the time they're few and far between, and there are few channels that even try to dedicate themselves around posting entire albums or organizing them. Again, this is probably the reason Bagdasarian hasn't given modern re-releases to a lot of their old albums, much less the vast majority of songs used in the episodes, but I already did a whole elaboration about that during the first year of this channel. So I ended up spending a lot more time on this third point than I thought. So to sum up everything, younger fans who grew up on the movies need to respect the fans of the older media and acknowledge it. Fans need to respect each other's opinions about why they enjoy the content, as well as do proper research before presenting something as fact. And finally, Bagdasarian's legal team needs to not copyright strike the slightest parody or image use of Alvin and the Chipmunks, as well as widely re-release the old Chipmunk cartoons and music, and Mini-Monks. Personally, I haven't encountered too much toxicity myself during the 4 years since I joined the online fan base, but I know a lot of people who have. In fact, I've met some very nice people through the Alvin and the Chipmunks fan base who sometimes have different opinions from my own, and respect that I grew up on the live-action films for the most part. This channel certainly wouldn't exist if I had a bad experience with other Chipmunk fans. For those of you who haven't yet joined any Alvin and the Chipmunks forums or Discord servers and have been considering it, I hope that this encourages you to find others who accept and respect your opinions for what they are. If you have been a victim of this toxicity, don't let others' mean comments get to you, and don't let how they make you feel influence what you decide to do next. For those who are guilty of contributing to the toxicity, then I hope this video has convinced you to change your ways. There is no shame in it as long as you end up doing the right thing. Feel free to let me know in the comments how you think the fanbase needs to change for the better, and your experiences being a part of it. Don't forget that you're also welcome to leave a like and subscribe, and doing so will let me know if you want more videos like this. I would also appreciate it if you could share this video with the various Alvin and the Chipmunks fan communities or anyone you know who likes the Chipmunks. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed, have a nice day, and thank you for your time.